Hi everyone, George here, the editor of the Sales Transformation Podcast. Just letting you know that we've split the episode that you're about to listen to into two parts, so the second half will be coming next week. With that said, please enjoy part one of Phil's chat with Carl Day.
Okay, well, I'm absolutely excited to be able to invite Carl Day, who's the Chief Sales Officer at Apogee, to the Sales Transformation Podcast. And Carl and I have had a relationship that goes back quite a number of years to when Carl was at Toshiba, and it sort of continued into his role now at Apogee. And there's so much that we could talk about, but I think before I go into some of the questions, Carl, a huge welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We finally got here.
We finally got here. And Carl, I think I wonder if you could just give us a brief potted history as to, what's been your career to date and how did you end up in the current role that you're now doing?
Yeah, sure. I guess rather than going back right from the start, whereas most people listening to this probably weren't born. So I guess the real start of my proper career, where I started to take it seriously, I joined Ricoh in the 90s. I joined in technical, so I started off in technical support, and right about the time when there was a sort of like digital revolution around print equipment. Everything went sort of digital and meant you could print from it, and photocopiers went to multifunctional devices, and the technology was at such a pace that Ricoh invested really heavily into educating and training people, developing people around IT skills. So, at the same time, again, this will make a lot of people listening laugh, that we didn't even have email when I first joined Ricoh. They were still using AS400. So at the same time, there's a rollout of PCs. So there was a lot of investment went into developing people. And pretty soon after I sort of completed my sort of IT development, and I did a little bit of programming, and I realized that a lot of the support I was giving was more to salespeople than to the technicians. So I had the opportunity then to take on a sales role in the channel team at Ricoh. And because of the knowledge I had, because of the IT knowledge I had, I kind of found that I was going to sales meetings, doing a lot of the talking and doing a lot of the selling with the sales guys, and that kind of led me on to sort of building a team in Ricoh, and then sort of moving up into being a sort of regional director and so on, and then joining Toshiba for my first role at board level, which is obviously when we met. And then Toshiba had sort of 9 good years at Toshiba, where we built the channel and also did a little bit of work with the direct team on the AP side, which is like barcodes, that sort of technology. And then from there had a brief sabbatical from the print industry, where I worked in financial services selling governance compliance, at which point I was approached by Apogee, who had been acquired by HP, to run the direct sales team there. So the direct sales team at that time was about 200 salespeople and about 50 support people. And then COVID hit. So I literally started a month before COVID. But I started with the remit of taking what was, a privately owned entity, and helping, the exec team shape it into, a corporate entity, at the same time as transforming behavior of the sales force, the skill of the sales force, taking them from selling single products to a multi-sales product, which was primarily driven by, the decline in use of paper and print, and the need to replace that income with other revenue streams. So it feels, actually, it's just saying it out loud, then it feels like it's gone as quickly as I've just said it. But that kind of probably spans about 2 decades.
Yeah, no, it's amazing actually. The the transformational journey that you've been on, from those those pre-email days now
Yes.
to
Yeah.
a world in which paper is now not being used so much, and of course we've got other implications of AI beginning to have a massive impact on the way businesses think about automation and so on. But I just want to say for the listeners is that when I first met Carl, he came to one of our events at the London Stock Exchange, and Carl was sitting at the back, and he was listening to some of the students that we had, I think, presenting about the masters. And Carl came up to me afterwards. I think we had a drink afterwards, actually, Carl, didn't we?
Probably.
And probably. And Carl said, I'd really like to do the masters. And at that time, we didn't have an open program. So I said to Carl, if you can find 10 to 12 people to join you on the masters, yeah, you can go on a masters. Not realizing that that's actually what Carl would do, and so he did. And when Carl was running the Toshiba channel business, it was amazing actually to see Carl working together with the channel partners and with the owners of these businesses. Many of whom had not had an undergraduate degree, let anything else, but sort of coming through this incredible experience. And we may get a chance to talk about that, but that's not the reason why in fact we've invited Carl to this podcast. But it's just been incredible to see Carl's commitment to people and developing people over the years. So I'm sure that's going to surface a bit when we start to talk about Apogee. So I'm really interested in having Carl on the Sales Transformation podcast because, Carl alluded to the challenge he faced when he was at Apogee in the early days. It was a privately owned company acquired by a very corporate, quite traditional, I would guess, corporate as well in Hewlett Packard, with very different kind of approaches and processes. And we've been working with Carl, certainly in the early days, significantly, as he started to look at the transformation that was kind of required. But I'd like Carl, could you kind of describe what you found when you first took on the role of sales director of Apogee, and the kind of challenges that you faced in those, or began to realize after maybe 3 or 4 months of being in the business, and what you had to do?
Yeah, I think one thing I've got to pick you up on, because I'll get told off if I don't. It's actually HP that bought. It's not Hewlett.
Okay, HP, not HP.
HPI, and
Sorry.
we're owned by HPI. So I think probably for anyone who doesn't know the industry, I was brought in at a time where, as we both said, print as a product, as an annuity product, was in decline. So volumes were in decline. And I guess we were, again, a lot of people probably don't know the industry, don't realise that the office print industry was one of the first to build annuity and sell a product as a service. So the product was sold on the basis that you pay per click for the device and the service that is wrapped around, and that's over an annuity-based contract. So the joining Apogee was my first real large job into a direct selling organisation, and I guess what I found was I was quite surprised that the focus was very much on the financials of the sale rather than what the requirement was of the customer. And it was very much a profit-driven entity, as a lot of private business was. It was PE owned, a private entity, and building for a sale. So the sales, the culture and the behaviour of sales was a reflection of that. It was built to make profit and focus on how to do that. And I guess the skill set outside of that was left neglected. for
Yeah.
the want of a better word. So yeah, it was quite. I went into it with my eyes open, expecting that, but probably not expecting it to be as focused on that as it was.
Yeah. No, I know in the early stages, you talked about it, and I think you realized that you had to, yeah, there were certain sort of challenges that the organization had to face around that, not just from an internal perspective, but also from, some of the clients that you were dealing with as well, um, who you had to kind of reposition Apogee, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah,
as and who perhaps might have been slightly skeptical at the beginning of, what was the new Apogee going to be. So I know a lot of what you did in the early stages was sort of reconnecting with the values that were important in order
mm,
to, provide the service to clients that you really wanted, and so on and so forth. So don't know if
yeah.
you
I
want to
think
comment on that.
probably that's quite hard to mass communicate. One of the things I've learned or learned very quickly is how difficult it is to communicate clearly, an expectation and intent to such a large group of people.
Yeah.
And I think that was something I underestimated. Um, but then cascading that out, that message, that intent through the team and then to a customer was and is been probably one of the harder challenges. I think in terms of that, because there's so many factors that come into this,
Yeah.
I think, you're never going to get that message out about how a business has evolved. And, ultimately, you had Apogee pre-acquisition, which was a privately owned business that, was driven to to deliver a product to a customer, but also to make profit, to grow, you know, um, whereas HP have obviously bought or acquired the business to build a closer relationship with the client and deliver end-to-end services. So then taking the sales force and trying to have them see that what you want to do with them has a much longer term benefit to them,
Yeah.
and I think trying to then express that to a client is very hard. When I was at, and that's bit, I guess everyone from any industry can who's been in sales at any length of time will tell you it's the most frustrating thing is when you're trying to explain to a customer that you're there to deliver a long term value and you're trying to sell against a perhaps a short term sales methodology. It's quite hard to articulate that to a client because having been, we're also clients as well as salespeople, and you yourself, when you're actually trying to explain to a customer what the intention of the business is,
Mm.
it it's very difficult. It's very difficult to say that you to how do you demonstrate that what we want to be a long term partner when in the past your behaviour has been very short term. So
Yeah.
I think that was a big challenge for us.
Yeah, no,
It,
it was such a massive challenge, and it's very interesting to hear you sort of talk about some of the difficulties and the time it takes sometimes to shift sort of habits that maybe people have had, and shift the mindset. So, on the one hand, you've got these 200 people that you've kind of inherited, and then you've got, on the customer side, you know, sort of issues to do with how to sort of grow the customer base and develop and broaden deeper client relationships. When you started to look at the problem that you had, where did you start? What did you feel were your priorities? Because you had so many moving parts to deal with, probably to do with remuneration systems, maybe how people were rewarded, how people are targeted. You had so many things that you had to change. So where did you start?
um, oh, that's a good question. So I guess if I can add something to the question and then give the answer,
Okay.
what what I expected. So obviously, in any senior sales role, you're recruited normally by the board or CEO, and they will have an expectation, which obviously is articulated to you, that we want to evolve the sales force. We want to be a more consultative sales force. We want to, we want to move away from this doing a deal on a calculator and a piece of paper. We want to go in and engage, create a relationship, and consult with our clients to a mutually beneficial end, which is obviously you buy into. This is what is kind of everything that I've been since I've been in sales. When you step across the plate, obviously there's an expectation that this is going to happen very quickly, but there's also this a barrier that you have to break down, that in their mind they've already got an idea of how this is going to happen. And if you
Right.
don't walk in on day one and do what they were expecting, you then face an additional challenge. So it's quite an isolating feeling when perhaps the CEO that's employed you, as well as the salespeople, are all now thinking, okay, what's your move? Because
Yeah.
CEO, particularly if they've got a leaning towards sales, will have an idea of how things should be done.
Right.
And if you're not doing it in that way, you've then got to prove to them, or they've got to be brave and trust you. And I guess every success comes with a little bit of luck, right? And I
Yeah.
guess the luck for me was there was a CEO change quite early on in my tenure, and I think that having a new CEO come in without a preconceived idea of what I should be doing allowed me the opportunity to explain what I wanted to do, and in the process that I wanted
Yeah.
to go through. So that was something that obviously was some luck that went in my favour. And the CEO that joined was one that did give me the time and trust and freedom to do
Well,
what
yeah.
I'd said I wanted to do. So to answer your question, the first thing I did was to work out which of the management was going to be with me, which, I was very open in probably a little bit too open in what my intent was. So what I realized very, very quickly is I needed, like I said, I needed to keep the all communication really narrow and small. But what I needed was the management between me and the sales team to be on board and exactly clear on where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And I think for anyone who's interested in transforming a business, a sales team of any shape or size, I think you need to communicate your intent to small groups and let them then cascade it out. And I
Yeah.
can't remember who talks about, the roller skate, trying to control 10 roller skates linked together by the one at the front. It's never going to happen. You've got to have people in between controlling.
Yeah.
So my first 6 to 9 months was spent working out who in that team understood what I wanted to do, understood where I wanted to go and how I wanted to do it, and most importantly, why. Uh,
Yeah.
and that, in a combination of bringing in people that I've worked with before, 2 or 3 people that I worked with before, but knew would help me,
Yeah.
with that message, with that journey. But it for me, I remember, and again, not to sound it like it's a sales pitch or it's an advert for you, Phil, is one thing I remember sitting there listening to Graham's story about Royal Mail, and
Yeah.
someone said to him, this was when I was at Toshiba, and someone said, "Oh, what was your biggest mistake?" And he said, "Our biggest underestimation was we trained the salespeople, not the management." We
Yeah.
trained the salespeople to or the customer service to go out and sell, but we didn't train the managers how to manage
Yeah.
first. And I thought that was really, really sort of an obvious point when someone says it, but it's quite often overlooked. So for me, it was 100%. We started with the managers, start with the management team.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I remember you saying that in the early days that you needed to get your sort of guiding coalition, if
Yeah,
you like,
yeah,
as we know from the transformation sort of practices that we have on the masters, and that it was very interesting in the way that you picked, to us the people that you felt were supporting your message. But even so, I think you found with some of those managers over a period of time, you realize that they're perhaps paying lip service, I think, to the why. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? That, it's extraordinary that um, it's extraordinarily difficult to know if people are actually with you,
it,
because people do a lot to kind of say, well, we'll say the right things to Carl to
yeah.
make Carl think we're doing things in the right way, but actually we're going to run the business as we did before. Don't worry. I think, I think that was some of the,
That must there. Yeah, that is, and it's look, I guess it's a frustration, but it was an expectation I had.
okay.
I
Yeah.
there's people, you get some people who will just tell you what you want to hear. They'll,
Yeah.
no matter what the consequence, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and it's I forget the psychological experiment where people would just do what they do because they feel there's a hierarchy above them. Um, someone
I'm,
you're talking about so and so. I heard someone was talking about on the radio the other day. But anyway,
yeah.
it's that. So that because you're so-called got the stripes, that people will tell you what you want to hear. So
Yeah.
I've never ever led any team, or I kind of try not to use the word leader or manager or anything like that, because I always say to my team, I do a job. I'm part of a team, and my job in that team is X, Y, Z. I have a role in this team just like everyone else. And I think if you can build the respect of the team that you're on a level, then people won't necessarily tell you what you want to hear. And
Yeah.
I'm always wary of the ones who always agree with me.
Yeah.
And I guess so. Not, no, I'm not saying I want a load of people who argue with me, but I don't get everything right. I haven't got all the answers. That's why I build a team around me. And I think quite quickly. I would say my skill is not an academic one. It's more of I do understand people and I can read people quite well. And I think
Mm.
so. Those that very quickly those people come to the fore.
Yeah.
Very quickly for a whole host of things, because what they don't realize is they might not be buying in to what you're saying, but the people below the people that are within those teams that they work with, they are buying into it. So
Yeah.
when they're not receiving, perhaps other teams are, or what you're telling, they very quickly, because you've not put yourself on that pedestal, you put
Mm.
everyone on the same level. They're quite comfortable in coming to you and saying, well, this isn't happening in our region, or this isn't happening in our office.
Mm.
So those individuals came to light quite quickly.
Yeah.
And there's different reasons for people not doing it, but the one thing I picked up from my fascination with military leadership is that you nip things in the bud quickly, so
Mm.
address problems quite quickly, and they don't become as big.
Yeah.
So when with those issues, we did deal with them quite quickly. And sometimes when you change in the culture as drastically as we did, there's an inevitability that you'll lose people. There is, going into it thinking we're not going to lose anyone, you'd
Yeah.
be incredibly naive.
Yeah.
So you know that people aren't going to be on board for the journey. You know, there's perhaps going to be some who want to be on board with the journey but won't make it. And I think as long as you treat people fairly and deal with that in the right way, it's just an expected part of transformation.
Yeah. If I just kind of summarize some of the key things I think, Carl, you've alluded to, it's very interesting, and perhaps I haven't picked up on this as much as I should have done in the early days, is the importance of the very senior leadership support, in your case, the CEO. And you talked about the luck you had when you had a new CEO kind of come on board and obviously gave you the time and the slack to be able to kind of implement your vision. It sounded like when you first joined, you felt you had your hands a bit tied, perhaps because of this tension
Yeah, I
and
think
this expectation.
don't blame anyone for that. It's probably
No,
a natural thing when
it
someone.
is. Yeah.
It always makes me laugh when a business says, "Oh, we're going to transform," and then, okay, who's leading the transformation? Someone who's been in the company 20 years, and you kind of think, "No."
Yeah,
But equally, when you bring someone new in, that new person's got to battle against
I know.
people.
Existing prejudices and
Yeah.
so on.
So I
Um,
don't. It was. I don't. I don't see that as that. I think that would happen anywhere. But
yeah,
like, for me, the luck was timing. That
yeah,
that a new CEO come in did didn't have a preconception of how I should do it. Yeah.
right. So you mentioned that, and that's really important. And it's upwards sort of stakeholder management, really, that having the right support in place. Secondly, you were in a business that was in decline. I mean, the industry is in decline. It's not the business, but the whole industry was going through um, a huge amount of change, which was accelerated probably by the pandemic. Because I remember all of this happened very, I was looking at when you started. It was February. You started, I think, with Apogee, and it was March, wasn't it, that we're all
Yeah.
having to work from home. And of course, that had a massive impact, if people can imagine, on people going to the office and printing. And it must have had a huge impact on the business, just the pandemic. And then you had this kind of culture shift, which was around the way things used to be done, which is very much transaction led, to one of sort of building a very different approach to customers. And you've got a lot of people. You mentioned 200. I think the numbers may be less now. But how to get that shift. And you've talked about this 9 months, and you've sort of focused on the management team, making sure you've got people around you that you are happy, really got the story. That you probably had to make some people decisions, in that you realize who's with you and who's not,
Yeah.
and so on. So you talked about nipping problems before they became really, big fires, if you like. So that, would you say it took you about 9 months or so before you felt you had you had the team around you that were going to take you forward, that that people really understood you know the vision deeply, not just at a surface level? Or did it take longer or shorter?
I would say it probably took a little bit longer to be
Yeah,
completely full. Now, don't get me wrong, the team has it's grown and shrunk since that time. But I would say probably at the end of the anniversary of the first year is when you start to feel actually I've got the right team around me. I've got a good, not just in the sales team, but it's, anyone who thinks sales is a be on level of a company is, again,
yeah,
it's probably doomed to failure, because
yeah,
the sales team is only as successful as the business that supports it. And I think that one thing I did spend a lot of time doing was spend time with the stakeholder management in the business to talk
yeah,
about how I wanted to change it, because I saw those those managers, the teams of people that would do everything from literally from point of prospect right through to implementing and then supporting the customer. They were hugely important to the transformation that I wanted to achieve.
Hi everyone, George here again to say that I hope you've enjoyed Phil's talk with Carl so far, and to remind you to tune in to part 2 when it releases next week. See you then.